Hi, this is Wade McKittrick, Superintendent at Wabasco Public Schools, and this is a Superintendent Stream. When do kids have to go home due to COVID? When do teachers have to stay home or go home because of COVID? How long do I have to stay home? When can they come back? These are all questions that we get a lot of so far this year. So I thought what I would do is take a few minutes to walk you through the decision tree that we've been provided by the Department of Health that we utilize to determine who needs to go home, who needs to stay home, how long do they have to, all of that good stuff. So that you would have the opportunity to access this decision tree and be able to proactively know where things are at should you run into a case of exposure or symptoms. So I'm going to throw the decision tree up on the screen so that you can see it as well. And what we'll start with on this decision tree is up at the top here, just so that you're aware. These are the two categories of symptoms that when we refer to a more common or a less common symptom, this is what we're talking about. A more common symptom of COVID-19 is a fever greater than or equal to 104 or 100.4 degrees Fahrenheit, the new onset or worsening cough, difficulty breathing, or new loss of taste or smell. The less common symptoms are the sore throat, nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, and you can read those symptoms on the screen. When they say less common, it means these are the symptoms that less commonly come alongside COVID, and singularly don't mean that it's a COVID concern. It's when multiple numbers of less common symptoms come into play that it's viewed as a more likely potential for COVID-19. So let's take a look at the decision tree and how it affects you, students, teachers, and staff. So on this top button, top circle, for people with one less common symptom. So the less common symptom means that you would evaluate the symptom, or if the kids were at school, we would evaluate the symptom and determine, are they well enough to remain in school or at some type of program, whether it's activities or whatever the case might be. So one of the less common symptoms, let's say, for example, Johnny has a sore throat and comes to the nurse and has a sore throat, doesn't have any other symptoms, just a sore throat. Mrs. Turbis would sit down and she would determine, okay, he has a sore throat. Should he remain in school or not? If it's a mild sore throat that they can continue on with school, that would be just fine. They're able to stay in school and they can go back to class. If it's something that is more severe, if it's really a bad sore throat where the child is having trouble swallowing, something severe, then they may get sent home because of that symptom. And then at that time, you can, as a parent, you can determine if you think that a COVID evaluation needs to take place or not. So we just continue right along the decision tree here. If they're well enough to remain in school, they stay. That's fine. If they're sent home, then you can consider the evaluation test from the healthcare provider. If you do that, they may put you into this next box right here where the evaluation or the test is taken, and then you go to a receives, a positive or a negative result, and move from there. If you decide not to get a evaluation or a COVID-19 test, we're certainly not going to make you do that for one less common symptom. Just have the kids stay out until 24 hours after the symptoms have improved. And if that's the case, one less common symptoms, siblings and household members do not need to stay home or quarantine. So that would be the less common symptom. Let's move down into people with one common symptom or one more common symptom or two least common symptoms. So if we look at the two up here, the less common symptoms, two or more of these symptoms or one or more of these symptoms, that's when the concerns level starts to rise. So if that were to take place, that student, parent or student, teacher, whoever that may be, staff member, they will need to stay home, or if they do come to school, they will be sent home because of having the more common symptom or two or more of the less common symptoms. In that case as well, siblings, we follow this down to this box. Siblings and household contacts should remain at home or would be sent home as well. So again, Johnny comes to the office, has a sore throat, but also has a pretty nasty cough. Johnny's going to get sent home, but Johnny has two siblings in school as well. Both of those siblings are going to be sent home as well and would need to stay home until something, we follow the boxes, until if they were to go in and get an evaluation from a healthcare provider or a COVID-19 test, that would be the next step. If the healthcare provider takes a look and says, you know, Johnny's got a sore throat and a pretty nasty cough, but actually he has strep throat, that explains why he has his symptoms. So from that standpoint, once the symptoms have there's an alternative diagnosis, there's a reason for those symptoms to have taken place. So once those symptoms, then we follow this alternative diagnosis, once those symptoms have improved, Johnny can come back to school. Because that alternative diagnosis has been created, the siblings and household members can immediately return back to school without having to take a COVID test or anything like that. So let's say the healthcare provider does not have a alternative diagnosis, and they said, we need Johnny to take a COVID-19 test. So Johnny does that, and Johnny receives a positive COVID-19 test. Johnny would need to stay at home in isolation for at least 10 days from the time the symptoms started and until the symptoms have improved and there's no fever for 24 hours. So a 10-day quarantine, 10-day isolation period. Also during that time, the siblings and the household contacts would also need to stay home and quarantine from all activities for at least 14 days. Why 10 days and 14 days? Because Johnny has already gone through the incubation period, which the incubation period of COVID right now is determined to be up to 14 days. So if symptoms haven't occurred within 14 days, they believe that they're not going to, and that the kids are free to go. So again, you receive a positive COVID test, Johnny would have to stay at home in quarantine for up to 10 days. And it says isolation because within your household, if Johnny is running around the house and the siblings are running around the house, and now Johnny's sister, Susie, develops COVID, the other sibling, who we'll call Betty still doesn't have any symptoms, but now her 14-day exposure just started over again because of contact with her sister, whose 10 days has just started now because developed symptoms. Make sense? You're with me? All right, great. What if the child is sent home and as a parent you decide we're not going to do a COVID-19 test? We're not going to get that. We don't want to do that. That's fine. That is totally your decision. But please just know then at that point, if you do not seek an evaluation or a COVID-19 test from a healthcare provider, then that student needs to stay home for at least 10 days, and the siblings of that student need to stay home for 14 days. All right. The last thing, and sometimes this is the one that's most confusing for people, is for people who are close contact with somebody who is tested positive. So Johnny was over at Jimmy's house this weekend, and Johnny's there on Saturday, goes home Saturday night, but spent the day playing with Jimmy. On Sunday, Jimmy starts feeling sick, goes in and gets a COVID test and comes back positive. Johnny has now been exposed to COVID. So while Jimmy would need to be up here and he had a positive test and would need to go into a 10-day quarantine, Johnny now is an exposure to COVID-19 and he would need to go into a 14-day quarantine. And here's where some of this gets confusing for people. So if I'm in a 14-day quarantine, it's suggested that I get tested for COVID-19 between 5 and 7 days after the last contact with the person who was the positive case. If I do that and I receive a negative result, a negative test, does that mean I'm cleared then? I can just go back to things? No, it does not. You cannot test out of a 14-day exposure quarantine. Even if the person receives a negative test result, they still need to complete the 14 days of quarantine before returning to school, simply because, again, they believe there's an incubation period of up to 14 days. So why would I, if I have to do the 14-day quarantine, why would I get tested? Well, one of the reasons is this. If you or your child got tested during that time and they were positive, they're still completing their quarantine. But the science right now says if you've tested positive, you're not susceptible to COVID-19 for 90 days from the time that you've recovered from COVID-19. So basically, you wouldn't have to worry anymore about exposures. As far if I came in contact with somebody who was a positive COVID-19 test, I would not need to do a 14-day quarantine because I've had it within the last 90 days. So that's one good reason to go out and get the test and find out if you're indeed positive or not. So I hope that looking at this decision tree makes sense to you, because when we get the phone calls from people saying, here's our situation, that's what we do, whether it's Mr. Kittleson, Mrs. Turbis, or me. We go directly to this tree and we simply walk right through it from bubble to bubble and find out where are you at on that decision tree, and then that's what we ask you to do. So I hope this little explanation helped, and as you help navigate the COVID-19 time, that this will allow you to proactively look at what your situation is and not just have to rely on us to explain it later. So I appreciate you taking a little bit of time to walk through the decision tree with me. And I hope that this helps you down the road. So until next time, it's a great day to be a rabbit.